Okay, so you know how it is you really want to get under the skin of a topic, find those key insights, but without feeling like you're drowning in information. Maybe even have a bit of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Finding that sweet spot.
Well, that's exactly what we're aiming for today. You brought this really fascinating text to our attention, Life of Sri Ramakrishna, and we're going to focus in on the part about Tantrika Sadhana.
It's a fantastic area to explore, truly. Tantrika Sadhana. It's this ancient spiritual discipline, and it offers such a unique way of looking at, well, the divine. And this particular biography gives us a really valuable window into its core ideas, specifically through Sri Ramakrishna's own intense personal experiences.
Right. So our mission for this deep dive is basically to unpack Tantrika Sadhana. It can feel a bit mysterious sometimes, maybe even misunderstood.
Definitely.
So we want to clarify the basics, as they're laid out in this biography, and maybe pull out some of those surprising insights about human spirituality, about that search we all have for something more. Okay, so the text kicks off by touching on something really, well, human, doesn't it? Our natural pull towards enjoyment, pleasure, and how hard it often is to renounce things.
That's a really crucial starting point, yeah. The biography points out, quite sharply actually, that even when we consciously try to follow a spiritual path, there's often this persistent clinging to the familiar comforts, the worldly enjoyments. It's almost like we want to keep peeking back, even as we're trying to move forward.
And the text even suggests that some sacred writings might include sensuous stuff for exactly that reason, to kind of meet us where we are, acknowledging how strong that pull of the senses.
Precisely. It's a way of accommodating that deep-seated human tendency.
Yeah.
And from that understanding, the text draws a really significant conclusion.
Which is?
That we're largely incapable, really, of navigating this intricate maze of desires just by using our own willpower. It strongly implies that divine grace is pretty essential if we want to truly get beyond these deep habits. So you see, right from the get-go, the text sets a realistic stage. It's not about denying who we are, but understanding the power of our own nature.
That makes sense, but it brings up the question, where did this Tantrika approach actually come from? It sounds like it has a really long history.
Oh, it does. And what's particularly interesting is tracing its roots, as the biography does, back to the Vedic period.
Vedas, okay.
Yeah, the text explains that the early Vedic practices, especially something called the Karma Kanda, actually tried to integrate both enjoyment and renunciation.
How did that work?
Well, think about that early period with all the rituals and sacrifices. The idea behind Karma Kanda was sort of engage with the world through these structured practices. Offer enjoyment, yes, but simultaneously through the discipline and the intention behind it.
Ah, okay.
It subtly purified the mind, preparing people for, deeper spiritual stuff later on.
So it wasn't about just cutting everything off right away.
Not in those earliest forms, no. The concept was more about this regulated engagement, refining the mind over time, getting it ready for the more abstract ideas in the Upanishads.
Right.
But the biography points to a big shift during the Buddhistic age. Practices that were originally meant for, like monks and renunciates, started being adopted by everyday people.
Householders.
Exactly. Regardless of where they were spiritually. And this shift, according to the text, led to more clandestine or secretive forms of worship popping up.
And that's maybe where Tantra steps in. The biography mentions it possibly replacing older Vedic rituals that weren't being used anymore.
That's one perspective the text offers, yeah. But what's really key is how the Tantras brought ritual and philosophy together. Much more unified than in the Vedic era, where they were often kind of separate tracks. The biography really stresses that every single act in Tantrika worship involves this deep, meditative focus on the unity between the individual soul, the jiva, and the supreme soul, the Paramatma.
Okay, so based on this source, what does a typical Tantrika practice actually, involve? What does it look like?
The biography lays it out pretty clearly. It describes this methodical process, right? Where the practitioner mentally guides the Kundalini Sakti.
Okay, that's the coiled energy.
Right. Picture this potent, dormant energy at the base of the spine, like a coiled spring. You guide it upwards, mentally, to what's called the 1,000-petaled lotus in the brain.
Wow, okay.
Then, after that ascent, there's a stage of identifying really profoundly with the divine. You project a chosen deity, you worship that deity, and then finally you mentally draw that projection back inside yourself.
That sounds incredibly internal and focused, doesn't it? Even if there are external rituals happening too. And the ultimate goal is realizing that unity we talked about.
Absolutely. The text makes it crystal clear. Even the effort itself, even if someone doesn't hit full realization right away, that effort is a crucial step. It constantly points the mind towards that oneness underlying everything.
Now, one thing the biography really highlights as distinctive is this tantric concept of God as mother and the glorification of women that feels quite different from some other ancient traditions.
It is. It's a major differentiator. The text points out that neither the Vedas nor the Puranas really give that same level of emphasis to the divine feminine.
Interesting.
Now, there were maybe some early seeds of it in the Vedas, like a husband viewing his wife's body as sacred for having worthy children, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But the Tantras took that idea and really expanded it, deepened it significantly.
And maybe that's where some of those more controversial Virachara practices come in, the ones involving wine and women, was the idea to connect with the average person's desire for enjoyment.
That's the rationale the text puts forward. The thinking was, if you could learn to see the divine within those very objects of enjoyment, you wouldn't be totally swept away by your senses. You'd gradually develop self-control. And the biography is really emphatic on this. A woman's body is sacred. It's to be revered as a goddess, a direct manifestation of the Divine Mother. Any mistreatment was absolutely forbidden.
That's a powerful idea, potentially really transformative. But the biography also warns about dangers, doesn't it?
It does, yes. It notes that over time, some followers got, sidetracked. They became too attached to the sensory side of things, started seeking psychic powers or worldly games instead of actual God realization. And this deviation, according to the text, led to what it calls grotesque ghost and demon worship and other abominations in some later tantric forms.
So it's a system that seems to hold both really high ideals and the potential for, going off the rails.
Exactly. The text underlines that even within the tantras themselves, there were always these different levels, different paths. People could choose based on their own inclinations.
Okay.
But the fundamental goal, it argues, always remained. Divinize the sense objects. See them as representations of the Lord, as a way to curb attachment.
The biography also talks about 3 distinct attitudes or ways to practice: Pasubhava, Virbhava, and Jivyabhava. Can you break those down?
Sure. Pasubhava, that translates roughly as the animal attitude. It's meant for people where those more basic primal instincts are still pretty dominant.
Yeah.
So the focus there is on consciously avoiding temptation, really diligently practicing japa, repeating sacred mantras, and maintaining high standards of purity, both in thought and action.
Makes sense. Then Virbhava.
Virbhava is the heroic attitude. This is seen as a stage for more advanced seekers, where their devotion, their love for the divine starts to become stronger than the pull of the senses.
Right.
These individuals are actually advised to live amidst potential temptations, but maintain unwavering focus on the Lord. It's a test of strength, in a way.
And the highest is Divyabhava.
Yes, Divyabhava, the divine attitude. This is the peak within this system. The person has pretty much transcended sensory impulses. They just have this deep, constant longing for God realization.
So virtues just become natural.
Exactly. Things like truthfulness, forgiveness, compassion, they aren't things you try to do, they just flow naturally from your state of being. But the key takeaway across all 3, the text stresses, is self-control. That's the bedrock. Without it, these practices don't bear fruit.
So it's a really nuanced picture of spiritual growth, acknowledging different starting points and paces.
Very much so. It's not about expecting a sudden jump to perfection, but a gradual unfolding.
It's also fascinating how these tantric ideas then seeped into and influenced other spiritual paths, like Vaishnavism, which the biography discusses.
Yes, the text suggests that tantric influence is actually quite widespread in many Indian worship systems we see today.
Right.
Now, specifically with Vaishnavism, while teachers adopted certain elements like using mantras, certain forms of external worship, they also brought in major shifts. They really emphasized dualistic ideas, the devotee and God as distinct, and fostered a very personal, heart-centered devotion serving the Lord.
The biography also mentions a difference in how offerings are viewed, right?
Yes, that's an interesting point it highlights. In Tantra, the idea is that the deities purify offerings just by looking at them. Their gaze is enough.
Okay.
Whereas Vaishnava teachers taught that their deities could actually physically partake of the offering, depending on the devotee's love and sincerity.
So it's more of a direct exchange in Vaishnavism.
Exactly. It reflects that emphasis on the personal relationship. The Tantric view maybe highlights the inherent purity of the divine, while the Vaishnava view stresses that loving exchange.
And Vaishnavism put more emphasis on that initial animal attitude stage, the Pasupapa.
Yes, very much so. Strong emphasis on that preliminary stage, strict rules about purity in all parts of life, and of course the crucial practice of japa, constantly repeating the Lord's name.
Okay, so given all this complexity and the potential for misinterpretation, what about the criticisms often leveled at Tantra?
Well, the biography offers a pretty insightful take on that. It suggests that a lot of the criticism doesn't come from inherent flaws in the system itself, but more from our own human tendency towards, seeking immediate gratification.
Blaming the tool for how it's sometimes misused.
Or something like that.
No.
And it strongly emphasizes that Tantrika rites can be practiced entirely without wine or sex. It holds up the life of Sri Ramakrishna as a prime example of this.
Which is the perfect lead-in to talking about Sri Ramakrishna himself and his journey through Tantrika Sadhana. It sounds like this was an absolutely pivotal time for him.
Oh, incredibly so. The biography frames it as the Divine Mother herself guiding him through these specific intense practices. Why? To equip him, essentially, to be this supreme spiritual teacher for our modern times.
And he had a guide for this.
Yes, the Brahmani.
Right.
She acted as his spiritual guide, showing immense motherly care for him, but also being very rigorous in directing his practices. And importantly, the text says Sri Ramakrishna explicitly sought and got permission from the Divine Mother before he even started this sadhana.
The descriptions of his practice in the book are really vivid, intense, mentioning rare ingredients, specific places.
They really paint a picture, don't they? The Brahmani collecting all these hard-to-find ritual items, Sri Ramakrishna meditating in particular spots like the Panchavati Grove or under the Bael tree.
Right.
And he described being almost immediately swept up in this incredible divine fervor, falling into deep trances very quickly, and experiencing just this constant stream of amazing spiritual visions one after another.
And the text mentions he undertook some really challenging practices, even ones considered potentially dangerous.
Yes, it refers to the 64 main Tantra texts and acknowledges that some of the sadhanas in them could potentially lead someone astray if they weren't approached with total purity and the right guidance.
But that didn't happen to him.
Not at all. The biography repeats this theme. The infinite grace of the Mother carried him through everything completely unharmed. It stands as this powerful proof of his absolute mastery over passions, his unwavering focus on the Mother.
It sounds like it requires immense discipline just to stay focused, avoid getting caught up in side effects or powers.
Absolutely. But his progress was, well, stunningly fast. The text notes he achieved the goals of these incredibly difficult practices in remarkably short times.
How is that explained?
His mind, the biography tells us, was just constantly operating at the highest spiritual frequency. He saw the Divine Mother everywhere, in everything, even in situations that would totally derail most people. He only felt profound divine bliss.
Wow.
The Brahmani herself, his very strict guide, eventually declared that he had achieved complete perfection in all the paths described in the Tantras, something considered extremely rare.
And his own life reflected the highest ideals, right? Especially how he viewed women and his avoidance of things like wine.
Completely. For him, every woman was literally an embodiment of the Divine Mother. That was his constant perception. The biography even says the word karana, which can mean wine in Tantra. For him, it would instantly bring the blissful Mother to mind and fill him with divine joy. He lost all sense of distinction between holy and unholy. He could see a street girl, the text says, and be reminded of the Mother, sometimes even going into samadhi.
That's incredible, even offensive words.
Even grossly offensive words, the text reports, would appear to him as symbols of the Divine Mother. His consciousness was just operating on a completely different level.
The description of the Kundalini rising in the biography is also amazing, very detailed.
It really is. Sri Ramakrishna used such rich language to describe that inner energy moving, like ants, frogs, snakes, birds, monkeys, each describing a different sensation or path of the energy rising.
And each leading to samadhi.
Each culminating in samadhi, yes. He apparently tried many times to describe the states beyond the throat center, but found it incredibly difficult as his mind would just get pulled upwards into those higher states.
And the text links these experiences to the Vedantic idea of the 7 planes, the chakras.
It does. It explains how the ordinary mind tends to hang around the lower centers, but through spiritual practice, it ascends. experiencing divine light at the heart center, only wanting to speak of God at the throat center, reaching fearlessness and the vision of the paramount man at the sixth center, the Ajna chakra, where only a thin veil remains. And then finally, merging completely with the Lord in the Sahasrara, the seventh plane, after sustained samadhi.
He also seemed to experience other unusual things, like sounds and understanding animals.
Yes, the text mentions other realizations. Seeing the ultimate cause as a luminous triangle, constantly hearing the anahata or unstruck sound, and yes, reportedly understanding the languages of animals.
And he attained siddhis, the supernatural powers, but dismissed them.
That's such a crucial part of his story. He attained them, yes, the 8 major siddhis, but the Divine Mother, according to him, showed him they were worthless distractions for a true devotee.
So he warned others against seeking them.
Strongly. He developed a real repugnance for them. He also had profound visions of divine Maya cosmic illusion, seeing it embodied as a woman emerging from the Ganges, representing creation, preservation, destruction, and visions of countless goddesses, with one, Shorasi or Rajrazari, standing out in beauty.
Did these intense inner experiences affect him physically?
Oh, definitely. The biography talks about periods where he became almost childlike, couldn't keep clothes on, and for several years he apparently had this extraordinary physical beauty that really drew attention.
And we didn't want that.
No. He eventually prayed to the Mother to take away the outward beauty, asking instead for deeper inner purity. He also apparently received a revelation about the future devotees who would come to him for guidance.
The speed is just mind-boggling, though, mastering each complex tantric path in just 3 days.
It's astonishing. The text explains it by saying his prior realization of the Mother was already so complete. He uses an analogy, like a master musician who can play any complex piece instantly, because they already know the fundamentals perfectly.
I see.
Ultimately, the biography presents his perfection in Tantra as unique, unprecedented. And it suggests his journey was vital for restoring the purity and true meaning of these ancient, powerful practices for the modern world.
So let's try to wrap up this deep dive into a really rich chapter. We've touched on how Tantrika Sadhana tries to integrate or maybe transmute our very human desires on the spiritual path.
Right, the tension between enjoyment and renunciation.
We looked at its unique ideas like God as mother, the complexities, and yes, the potential dangers of the practices, its influence on other traditions like Vaishnavism.
And of course, the absolutely extraordinary example of Sri Ramakrishna's own intense journey through it all.
Yeah. Was there a particular aha moment for you in revisiting this?
You know, for me, it's really grasping that core idea of deifying the senses, not just indulging them, not just suppressing them, but seeing the divine in the objects of attraction as a way to ultimately transcend the attachment. That feels profound.
And also, the way the text lays out those different stages, Basava, Virabhava, Divyabhava, it gives such a practical framework for understanding that spiritual growth isn't always linear. You know, we're all starting from different places.
That's a great point. So for everyone listening, maybe something to reflect on is, how do you navigate that balance or that tension between worldly desires and spiritual aims? Whatever they mean for you. Could exploring these ancient approaches, especially through the lens of someone like Sri Ramakrishna, offer any fresh insights for that very personal, very human quest we're all on?
And maybe one final thought to leave people with. Considering the sheer intensity of Sri Ramakrishna's experiences, how deeply personal and transformative they were, how might experiences like that completely reshape how someone sees reality, sees the sacred, even in just everyday life?
Right. What does his journey really suggest about the potential for transformation that might be dormant, maybe, inside each of us, just waiting?
I hope you like this chapter. We need volunteers and sponsors to create content with even better quality and with more variety. If you wish to join this initiative as a volunteer or sponsor, please click the links given in description below. To help us reach more viewers, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Biography Central. Thank you for your time. It means a lot. Namaste.